And at the end of the day, if you've got a bunch of people absolutely convinced that you've got blood on your hands, that you're responsible for the genocide of Gazan children, if a bunch of people genuinely believe that, I'm not sure another door-knocking session or another leafleting session is going to have made a huge amount of difference. But look, you've got to look forward, and you've got to look, and people will have to hold these independent MPs to account.
So, Lizzy, you're back with us, our first time together, but you've brought a guest.
Yeah, I'm standing in for John today, and so I thought I'd bring another John with me. Got John Ashworth with us today, the Chief Executive of Labour Together and the former MP for Leicester South. Obviously, you were in Parliament for a long time, lost your seat sadly at the election, but you were happy to come along today and talk to us about, how the campaign went and how things are going.
Well, I'm absolutely thrilled to be on The Division Bell, Westminster's premier podcast.
Such a good guest.
Apart from the times when I'm on the other Westminster podcasts, which are getting me on at the moment. But no, I'm really pleased to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Well, let's get into it. I'm Sam Lister, political editor at The Express.
I'm Lizzy Buchan, deputy political editor at The Mirror.
And this is The Division Bell. So, John, it's just me and Lizzy here that you're talking to, so think of us as your political therapist. Tell us how you felt, because I was obviously in the head office, actually in a nearby office to Lizzy in Canary Wharf, and I have to say your result was one of the big shocks of the night. We all gasped when we saw the result. How did you feel? I mean, did you have an inkling that night? Was that the first time you knew? I mean, how did you feel? What happened?
Oh, I mean, it's obviously brutal to lose, and nobody wants to lose.
Yeah.
I think that when you are putting yourself forward for Parliament, you do have to be slightly philosophical about these matters. You do always have to have a reality check and know at the back of your mind that you could lose. I mean, because that is the nature of the job. It's a precarious occupation. So given the strength of feeling on the Gaza issue, given that a sizable number of my former constituents in Leicester South felt that the general election campaign was a referendum on Labour's Gaza position, given that some of them literally thought that I was personally responsible for genocide and I personally had blood on my hands, I mean, a position which I just thought was baffling, frankly, and something I fundamentally disagreed with, given I'd called for a ceasefire, given that I'd had a long-standing commitment to Palestinian state recognition, given that I even had Palestinians coming to campaign for me. But nonetheless, when there is a depth of anger and a strength of feeling, it's very difficult to overcome that. But then there was the other half of the constituency who were more preoccupied with the future of the National Health Service, more preoccupied with energy bills, more concerned about schools for their children. So it was a very divided election campaign. It's now a very divided constituency, with some people saying, what's going to happen? We wanted an MP who was more focused on the NHS, and the other side of the constituency saying this is great. We wanted to send a message. I've got to say, we knew what the message was. We'd been hearing the message loud and clear for months and weeks. It's why we'd been calling for a ceasefire. But it didn't seem to matter that we'd been calling for a ceasefire. All that seemed to matter was what Labour did on a rebel SNP amendment to a King's Speech in November, which everybody knows who follows Parliament would have had no material impact on what was happening on the ground in the Middle East. But nonetheless, look, that's politics. And I wouldn't want you to think I'm being casual or dismissive about this. I'm just recognising that if you put yourself up for election, you've just got to accept that sometimes it's not going to go your way. On the other hand, despite my understandable and natural disappointment at losing, particularly in what had been a very brutal, vitriolic campaign of getting huge abuse on the streets, you may have seen some of the videos that got shared on social media. I mean, absolutely horrible. The abuse that we used to get. On the other hand, I'm immensely, immensely proud that I played my bit in securing a Labour landslide victory. I mean, you know, you couldn't get me off the telly in that campaign because I was talking about making the case for Labour, going on the attack on the Tory record. I had a huge national role in that general election campaign, and I'm immensely proud that I was part of both the strategic discussion about Labour's campaign as part of the strategy in Labour head office, and I played a big front of house role. And look at that Labour victory. And in the end, look, you know, it's always up to the voters to decide. But all the improvements that will now be delivered for the people of Leicester South, improvements in the National Health Service, improvements in our local schools, improvements in workers' rights, improvements to bring down energy bills, it's because we've got a Labour government, not because they've got an independent MP.
Do you think that you took your eye off the ball a little bit, though, because you were front and centre of that campaign? You were on the TV all the time. You were doing these emergency press conferences. You know, you really were at the very heart of that. But do you think that it was a bit like head balls almost? It was, you know, you were so busy doing the central stuff that maybe you didn't really realise what was going on locally and how bad it was for you?
I mean, possibly, but woulda, coulda, shoulda.
Yeah.
I'm a great believer in always moving forward. You know, don't look back. You know, have no regrets. Again, I don't want you to think I'm being casual about it. I'm not remotely. But, you know, what's the point of beating yourself up?
Mm.
And at the end of the day, if you've got a bunch of people absolutely convinced that you've got blood on your hands, that you're responsible for the genocide of Gazan children, if a bunch of people genuinely believe that, I'm not sure another door-knocking session or another leafleting session is going to have made a huge amount of difference. But look, you know, you've got to look forward, and you've got to look, you know, and people will have to hold these independent MPs to account, whether they actually deliver, whether they actually, and people will have to decide whether the Labour government delivers for them. But as I say, the improvements that I'm confident that will be delivered for the people of Leicester South is because we've got a Labour government, not an independent MP.
Do you think? I suppose, does it make you sad that actually people were voting on Gaza rather than domestic issues?
No, I mean, no, because it's not for politicians to tell voters what the most important issue is for them. Not at all. But it is. I personally found it frustrating that even though we were saying we are calling for a ceasefire, we are calling for UN funding to be restored. We want to see Palestinian state recognition as part of an international roadmap to peace and a two-state solution. I did find it very frustrating that many of the things that people were marching for, were sending me emails for, were putting up flags for in their windows, we were actually calling for and doing. Yeah, it didn't seem to matter, because all that seemed to matter was a parliamentary game back in November. And we know, I've been around Parliament for a long, long time. You know, and look, don't get me wrong, I know what the games that go on, and you report on the games. Nobody really believed that SNP motion was going to deliver a ceasefire. It was not the equivalent of when Tony Blair brought a motion to Parliament asking for an endorsement to deploy troops into Iraq. Or when David Cameron brought a motion to Parliament asking for an endorsement to launch airstrikes on Syria, something I voted against at the time. Those were votes which would have had a deep impact on the development of a conflict in the Middle East. Yeah. The SNP motion to the King's Speech was just a bit of parliamentary games to embarrass the Labour Party. And yet it took on a weight and significance for campaigners and many people, which was way beyond what it actually was in Parliament. But look, that is politics. That is how, you know, I don't want the people to misunderstand me. And when all this goes out on YouTube and Twitter and so on, it's not that I'm complaining about that, because that is how Parliament works, and political parties are within their rights to bring motions to try and give an issue an airing. But it would not have delivered the ceasefire, and that is why that was, I think, a frustration. And look, we will see now where we get to. I mean, a Labour government, one of the first things the Labour government did was ring up Prime Minister Netanyahu and said, we want a ceasefire. One of the first things the Labour government has done is restore the UN funding for humanitarian assistance in Palestine. A Labour government is talking about putting back on track and a discussion and a process for Palestinian state recognition as part of a two-state solution. So all the things we said we wanted to do, we are actually doing, again, because we have a Labour government, not because we have these odds and sods of independent MPs and Greens and all the rest of it.
I'm interested in why so many Muslim voters and people who are voting on Gaza went for the Labour Party, not for the Conservative government. Why do you think they particularly were so angry at the Labour Party?
Well, look, I mean, people were perhaps... Look, first of all, people should be angry about Gaza, right? Because what is happening is horrific. The loss of life is horrific. The failure for a ceasefire to be brought about is a failure of international politics. So people should be angry about Gaza. And we mustn't dismiss that, and we mustn't belittle that. It is an absolutely heartbreaking, horrific, ongoing conflict with an intolerable loss of life. People should be angry about what is happening. But it is true that the Labour Party became the target of anger, perhaps because people probably thought the Labour Party should have spoken out in more strident terms early on, perhaps. But, you know, as I say, you can understand why people are angry. But all our attempts to say a Labour government wants a ceasefire, will work for a ceasefire, a Labour government wants to get the issues around Palestinian statehood back on track, it just didn't seem to wash with people. But look, you know, that's politics. I mean, look, I'm not sort of, I'm not bitter about it, and I'm not remotely feeling sorry for myself or anything like that. And I wouldn't want to convey or people to misinterpret that or think that is the position. You know, I was known as the attack dog. I can put up with robust debate in politics. So look, it just is what it is.
Yeah.
And as I say, you don't look back, you look forward, and you work out what you're going to do next and how perhaps you come back. Nigel
Farage says that he believes we've now got sectarian voting in this country on a scale that we've not seen since the Troubles and the Protestant Catholic vote. Do you think that's fair?
No, I'm not going to castigate whole communities. I mean, first of all, the Muslim community in the United Kingdom is a very diverse community. And to just sort of, in one sweeping way, to say everybody thinks this way or that way, that's quite patronising, and it's quite dismissive of a very diverse community. So I wouldn't go there on that. But you know, there were in my constituency, and we've seen it in other constituencies, small groups of very aggressive people intimidating Labour candidates and Labour canvassers in completely unacceptable ways, running up to people and putting their iPhones in their face and trying to goad them, harangue them, try to sort of embarrass them and make people feel very uncomfortable in the streets. I mean, look, I don't want to sound sanctimonious and pious, but you know, we do live in a society where two of my parliamentary colleagues were murdered. So when people run up to you and stick their iPhone in your face and are shouting their heads off at you, it's frightening. It's scary. You know, I'm a tough guy. I grew up in Manchester, you know, rough background and all that. So not much phases me, but you know, there is part of you thinking, where is this going to go? Who are these people who are doing this? Because they're not people you've seen before. And that needs to be dealt with. That intimidation we've seen in politics, we need to deal with it. Everybody who believes in democracy should speak out against that and say it's unacceptable.
So, John, obviously you've now moved on to working for Labour Together. Can you tell us a bit about the work you're doing there?
Yeah, so I'm the chief executive of Labour Together. I'm a CEO, can you believe it? Doesn't that sound fancy, isn't it? Yeah.
It's a bit of change.
Isn't it? Yeah, John Ashworth, CEO.
Have you got the business cards, big thick ones to prove it?
Not yet, that's what I need now. No, in all seriousness, Labour Together it's like a think tank. It was a body that was set up by a lot of people who were close to Keir Starmer, and Keir Starmer's sort of right-hand man, somebody called Morgan McSweeney, who real sort of followers of the real details of politics have probably heard of. And it was set up as a sort of stand-right think tank, and it supported and helped Keir Starmer's leadership, and in turn supported and helped the Labour Party win the last general election by doing a lot of policy development, polling analysis, and so on. So I've come in to run this think tank and think about what it does now we're in government. And the big task that I've got is to properly understand what happened in that general election. Because when you look at the results of the general election, there are astonishing results across the country. I mean, we've just been talking about my result in Leicester South, which on paper should have been a rock-solid Labour seat. Equally, a whole load of what should have been rock-solid Conservative seats elected Labour MPs. I mean, Liz Truss lost her seat. I mean, she's probably the most famous loss on the night in what should have been a safe Tory seat, but there's others that, which I'm only just because I'm only now really going through it in detail. But like people like Liam Fox lost his seat. People like Theresa Coffey lost her seat. I mean, these have been Tory MPs for a long time, and then Michael Gove didn't stand, but his seat went Liberal Democrat. So these were real strong Tory seats. So what is going on there? And there's obviously Reform did well. They've got MPs and they've done very well in parts of where they've become second place as well. So we really need to understand what is going on in that election, and therefore to understand what happens next. And so what Labour Together's role is, and the work I'm leading on with Labour Together, is to start thinking about the next general election campaign, thinking about what will be the challenges, what is the coalition of voters that Labour needs to win again. So we're going to be doing a lot of thinking, we're going to be doing a lot of analysis, we're going to be learning lessons from across the world. I'm hoping to get over to the Democratic Convention later this month. Rather in August, we're not in August yet, are we? We're still in July. So in August,
wishful thinking there.
In August is what I mean. So to sort of learn a few lessons and see what their thinking is about their re-election campaign. So that's really what we're doing. But we're already thinking about the next general election.
One of the things that struck me on election night was, obviously you talked about Reform. They won 5 seats, but they also came second in lots of seats in the North East, across the Midlands. They're clearly sort of in places that Labour won. They were kind of snapping at your heels, really. What do you do to counter that threat for the next election?
Well, I think that the Labour Party have got to start taking the argument to Reform and taking them on for their views, which I think, when they're really exposed, their views are out of kilter with the mainstream views of the British public. Their views on international questions around Ukraine and Russia and national security, their views on the National Health Service. And I think you'll see a lot of scrutiny now on Reform. No question whatsoever that Nigel Farage is a superb campaigner and a personality. But I don't think he's had the scrutiny from the Labour Party that he deserves, and he's going to get that scrutiny, and his team are going to get that scrutiny over the next 4 or 5 years.
And obviously Labour Together was born out of Keir Starmer's leadership campaign back in sort of 2020, and is always seen by people in Westminster as being quite close to the now Prime Minister. How do you think he's doing, and how are you going to sort of seek to influence that?
Well, I mean, I'm really pleased with the start that we've made. I mean, he looks like a Prime Minister, doesn't he? I think he is.
He looks very happy with his red folders.
I think people are looking at him and thinking, yeah, this guy can do the job. I think they feel that, certainly for the last 6 or 7 years, it's been pretty chaotic in Westminster. Whether that has been we don't need to go through it all. We know how mad it's been with the parties and then the Liz Truss debacle and all that. And I think they look at Keir and they think, yeah, this guy, Prime Minister, and it's interesting that his polling numbers have hugely improved since he became Prime Minister. And I think they feel he's made a convincing and commanding start. So we've been very quick to talk about how we want to fix the problems in the NHS and fix the strikes. We've been talking this week about how we want to give people an opportunities to reskill and get a good apprenticeship. We had Liz Kendall a couple of days ago. She's the Shadow Welfare Secretary, talking about how we want to get people back to work, particularly these huge numbers of people who've been out of work for reasons of long-term sick, and giving them support and help to get back to work. Got Ed Miliband talking about the plans to invest in our green industrial future, which creates good jobs but brings bills down. You got Louise Haigh talking about how we want to fix the problems on the railways and bring them back into public ownership. And of course, you've got Rachel talking about the future of the economy. And I think what you've seen in these first few weeks of the Labour government is serious, heavyweight cabinet ministers coming out, outlining a plan of how they want to fix the country and fix the problems in the country in order to raise living standards for working people. But you're also now, I think, beginning to see something very interesting. They spent the first few weeks, looking under the carpets, seeing what's been pushed to the back of the cupboard, bringing out the dead, if you like. All the sort of things that the Tories had left in the in tray and didn't want to deal with, all the problems that they let pile up. And I think in the next couple of days you'll see cabinet ministers being really clear with the public of what absolutely awful inheritance they have had from the Tories and how we're going to clean up that mess.
But this is the honeymoon period, right? And it probably isn't going to last very long because the challenges are so great. So right now, it's fine for cabinet ministers to say, oh, the Home Office is in a mess and it's the previous government's fault, but that's not going to last. And you're going to get to this sort of autumn and people are going to start to want to know more about what Labour's going to do to fix those problems. Do you think they're sort of ready for, they're aware that they've not got long before things really start to get tricky?
Well, indeed, but you can only fix the problems facing the country if you're honest about how deep-rooted those problems are. And I think what you'll see in the next few days is cabinet ministers really, really outlining how deep-rooted these issues are and what a mess it is. But you are right. You're right. Governments of all colours and persuasions have a sort of limited amount of time where they still get the benefit of the doubt. But the key thing is whether this government, and I think it will, can show that it has a plan, a detailed plan to fix these various problems and take people on the journey of how they're going to fix that. To be honest with the public and say, look, we're not going to be able to sort this overnight. If you've inherited NHS waiting lists of 8 million, NHS waiting lists so big you can see them from the moon, you're clearly not going to deal with that backlog overnight. So Wes will outline a plan of how he's going to bring those waiting lists down. When in schools you've got problems with the concrete and all of that, Bridget will outline a long-term plan about how we're going to fix that. When there's so many people who are out of work for reasons of sickness, you're not going to be able to get those back to work overnight. And Liz Kendall will be outlining a plan of the reforms she's going to introduce to the welfare system and the job census to help people back to work. So as long as you explain the journey you're on and the plan of how you're going to get there, I think the British public will credit the Labour government for that approach.
Well, it was the first PMQs since the election yesterday, which should be an exciting event. But I have to say, I thought it was a total snooze fest. Maybe that's no bad thing. Maybe that's what people need at the moment. But blimey, I do hope it's going to liven up a bit. I think we saw, obviously, Rishi Sunak's got quite a difficult role now that he is in opposition. He can't really start attacking Keir Starmer when he's only been in the job a couple of weeks. So we saw him go on foreign policy. It was all very consensual. They were all both very full of praise for each other and the work they've done on Ukraine consensually and all that kind of stuff. And then obviously you have Ed Davey now he's back. The Lib Dems are now the third party again, so he gets that prized slot of 2 questions per week, which, again, obviously he asked very important questions about social care, but I personally really missed Stephen Flynn in that slot. We did get one question from him, but he used to be incredibly clever at working out how to go for the government, but also really attack Labour with his 2 questions. And he's got a killer instinct. I mean, this man is somebody who knows how to play that game in the chamber. So I think he is a big loss to that weekly session. I don't think Ed Davey is going to be quite as exciting. And I think the biggest attack Keir Starmer faced really was from his own backbenchers. We obviously had questions about puberty blockers, questions about Gaza. And that was the only real points of interest for me in yesterday's session. What did you think, John?
Well, I suppose it was going to be inevitable that the 2 principals, the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition, would adopt this sort of statesman-like, mature, serious approach, because think about what's going on. From Keir's point of view, he wants to look like he is the Prime Minister in command of the details, in command of the country. I think he is doing that brilliantly because it's exactly what he is. That he is in command. Rishi Sunak, look, he's now thinking about his legacy. He's just faced an absolute battering in the election. It's actually quite a big deal, actually, and hats off to him to get up there at PMQs and do this, because what the listeners and the viewers might not realise is how small the chamber is, and how you are quite on top of each other. And when you are at the dispatch box, you face a wall of noise from people shouting at you, sort of pulling faces at you, trying to knock you off your stride. That can be incredibly intimidating. And although I know people who watch PMQs probably get a sense of the noise, but you don't really get how noisy it is, because the microphones only pick up the people who are speaking at the moment. It can be like a football terrace sometimes. So to stand up, literally almost as far away as I am from you, and to sort of take that on when there's hundreds of people behind you shouting and trying to put you off, that's quite a big deal. So I mean, hats off to Rishi Sunak. I think he's obviously thinking about his legacy. He wants to look like a statesman now. There's nothing for him to be gained by going on the political attack. If anything, he'd probably look a bit cheap and a bit bitter. So he's got to rise above that. I suspect PMQs is going to be a little bit like this until we get the new Tory leader. I'm afraid. But
that's months away.
But what I will say though, I when I was broadcasting for a rival news outlet yesterday. It was very interesting that we did a discussion about was PMQs boring. It was very interesting that the number of calls and messages coming in saying, "Thank God we've got mature, serious questions back. The grown-ups are back." So even though we in Westminster love the drama and a good ding dong, actually out there, I think the British public are less enamoured by the Punch and Judy show that we get very excited about.
Do you know what though? I once went up to Holyrood. I'm sure you've been many times, but I went. Actually, it was as a guest of a Scottish journalist, and sat in the chamber up there for a while. And my goodness, it is boring. And
it is boring.
They clapped. The SNP politicians were clapping each other after speeches, and I just thought. I know people get really annoyed about the Punch and Judy side of politics in the Commons chamber, but blimey, I would much rather take that every day over, MPs, MSPs, whatever, clapping each other for their brilliance and all sitting there really politely. I mean, it was just awful. It felt communist to me, but there you go.
I think PMQs as well also, like I often have people say to me that they think, oh, it's so immature and it's why do our politicians do this? But I think when you actually are in there, when you're watching it like we do, it gives you such a useful read of the temperature of the Commons, of what everybody's doing, of how a leader is faring, what the mood of the party is, so we're all constantly sort of looking for all of that sort of thing. And I always really enjoy it. I think but yesterday's was, not the most entertaining.
It's not going to stay in the memory, is it?
No. I did think Rishi Sunak I quite enjoyed his joke about he sort of wished the British Olympians well, and then said, oh, they probably don't want to take any advice from me about how to win, which I thought was quite sort of self-deprecating and funny. But
it's also, I did think it was funny, and I did think it was self-deprecating, and what else can he do? But I also felt a bit, actually, if you're one of the 250 MPs who lost their seat, it really is not a laughing matter. And actually, I do think sometimes we have to remember that there are a lot of people who are out of jobs and feeling very bruised by the whole process, and so perhaps laughing about it in that way is not always the best thing to do. But
no, that's true. But then I suppose with Rishi, I mean, they're making him stay around for so long. What else can he really do?
He's almost been held hostage, hasn't he?
Exactly.
Just feel a bit like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting, PMQ. I mean, I've helped leaders of the opposition and prime ministers prepare for PMQs over the years, Labour ones, obviously.
I thought you were going to make some big revelation.
Yes, I can now announce that. No. I mean, it's such an interesting event in as much as journalists become very, very obsessed with it, in as much as they read huge sort of political significance into the who has won the jousting across the dispatch box, and it does hugely impact the morale of your troops. If your guy does badly, your troops are in the doldrums. If your guy does well, everyone's in a great mood. I mean, you sense that in something called the tea room post PMQs, which is basically a sort of canteen which MPs get to go to, and the sort of dining rooms where everyone files out of the PMQs and goes to the tea room or the dining room to get their lunch or portcullis house, and it really does impact the mood. So it's really, really important. And I think the Conservatives are going to struggle for a bit because I don't think they've quite realised what an awful slog opposition is. Obviously, intellectually, they know they've lost because the parliamentary arithmetic is what it is. But I don't think they've quite realised how difficult it is, like it was for us in 2010, that you've lost, your numbers are hugely depleted, you don't get the support of the civil service machine, and all of a sudden you've got to put up a reasonable show of an opposition. And what I don't mean, by the way, sticking out a press release and going on politics shows and giving your line to take. You've got to put up a good show in committees, bill committees, legislation, statutory instrument committees, and you've got to do all the research yourself or with your very small team. You've got to understand all the issues yourself, and it is hard. It's a hard slog, particularly when there's so few of you. And I think a lot of Tory MPs are going to find that quite demoralising, actually, when they really get into the weeds of that, which will presumably start more in the autumn time.
Who do you think Keir would be most worried about facing?
Well, there's two questions there. There's there's a sort of who would you worry about facing week by week in Parliament, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's not necessarily the person who you would be most worried about in a general election. I mean, like William Hague was famously brilliant at PMQs. Or Tony Blair was also brilliant at PMQs. I mean, if you go back and watch the Tony Blair versus William Hague battles on YouTube or whatever, I mean, they are superb. I mean, they are both superb. But there were weeks when William Hague got the better of Tony Blair. I think it's slightly become exaggerated in history that William Hague was brilliant every week and Tony Blair wasn't. I mean, Tony Blair is a class act as well and was absolutely brilliant and often got the better of Hague also. But famously, Hague was good at the dispatch box, but just couldn't connect with the electorate in the 2001 campaign, could he? So I don't know, really. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, we've only got 2 contenders announced so far that I'm aware of. I presume there'll be more. I can't really read the Tory party at the moment, given that there's so few of them. I mean, Kemi Badenoch seems to be the favourite, but I've never thought she was a very impressive performer at the dispatch box personally. Although she has people who sort of rave about her, and I've never quite got it, but we'll see. She's probably is she a darling of the Express, Kemi Badenoch?
We're letting all candidates come to us and make their pitch, and then we will decide in October who we're going to endorse. So we're open to all offers of op-eds and interviews and chats about their political philosophy. So we'll keep our powder dry for now.
Another thing that kind of came up during PMQs that I thought was interesting was obviously the row over the 2-child benefit limit, and the SNP's Stephen Flynn, who Sam mentioned earlier, raised it, was sort of brandishing a copy of the Daily Record that he was told off and made to put down, which contained an interview from Gordon Brown talking about child poverty levels. And there had been this rebellion in the Commons the night before, obviously the same sort of thing that you talked about when you were talking about Gaza, an amendment to the King's Speech to scrap the 2-child benefit cap. And 7 MPs were suspended for rebelling. Keir wasn't asked about it by anyone in Labour, but the SNP asked about it twice. How do you read where this is going? Because it is a huge issue and a lot of people are clearly quite uncomfortable about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, first of all, I mean, I am on record criticising the 2-child limit. I called it vicious.
Called it heinous in the Daily Mirror.
Heinous in the Daily Mirror and vicious. And I think, in fact, the former Tory welfare minister, Lord Freud, also called it vicious. However, first of all, you've got to remember the fiscal inheritance that Rachel Reeves has been handed, thanks to Liz Truss particularly, but also because of all kinds of mistakes the Tories made. The public finances are shot to pieces. And we were very clear in the general election campaign. Our manifesto was fully costed, fully funded, and we were only going to implement the policies where we could explain where the money was coming from. We were asked in the general election campaign about the 2-child limit. I was asked repeatedly about it when I was doing morning media rounds, and we had to be honest with the British public. We cannot afford to make a change where we cannot say the money is coming from. So what has happened this week is it was the votes on the King's Speech, the first Labour King's Speech for 14 years. That King's Speech is putting in place the programme that we outlined in the manifesto. And I think not to defend the Labour King's Speech in the voting lobbies of Parliament, when we'd just been elected 3 weeks ago on a manifesto to implement that manifesto in this King's Speech, to not defend the Labour position in the voting lobbies, I can well understand why the Chief Whip and Keir Starmer took the decision to take the whip off 7 MPs who voted with all the odds and sods and the Greens and the SNP and the Independents, etc., against a Labour King's Speech. I can understand why they took the whip off them, and you can't. This is the Labour programme. You cannot undermine it. You have to defend it in the voting lobbies. And look, earlier this week, Labour announced a child poverty task force to look at all these issues. So it's not as if Labour are closing the door on reforms. But Labour are saying we've got to understand the financial position we're in, but we want to listen to the various different experts about how we tackle child poverty. So there is a process there by which Labour MPs, who rightly feel strongly about this, no Labour MP supports this policy, right? Labour MPs do want to see change, but there's a process that's been set up for people to engage with and to put in their evidence and put in their thoughts. But we've also got to remember that we cannot make unfunded spending commitments, because if you make an unfunded spending commitment and you implement it, you're back to the Liz Truss days. So, look, they didn't need to vote with the odds and sods against the Labour King's Speech this week. They could have made the arguments, they could have made the speeches in Parliament, as other colleagues did, and they could have engaged with this child poverty task force that Keir Starmer set up.
Isn't actually the position Labour is in now really where the public are, though? You've got 60% of the public actually back the cap. And so although on Twitter, and we know Twitter is not representative of the real world, you see Sir Kid Starver trending as a result of this vote. Actually, 60% of the public think it's a good thing that people actually, if they can't afford to have more than 2 kids, shouldn't expect the state to kind of step in. Isn't Keir Starmer actually, shouldn't he really be thinking about that side of things, that actually removing the cap is going against public opinion? Well,
it's certainly true that the polling has always supported this policy. That's why the Conservatives introduced it in the first place, obviously. Although, and actually, interestingly, when I was on my rival news channel yesterday doing the phone-in on this, the support, the weight of opinion was in favour of what Keir Starmer had done to remove the whip from these 7 MPs. Actually, I was expecting it to be a bit more balanced. I mean, people did ring in and disagree, obviously, but it was clear where the majority of opinion was on it. But look, if you want to tackle child poverty, which every Labour government wants to do, you do have to look at the structure of the social security system. But the right way, an appropriate way to do that, is to understand the public finances and to put in place a strategy which deals with all the different elements of it. Because it's not just about social security payments and whether you get social security payments for 2 children, 3 children, 4 children. There's wider things. There's stuff about what you get in schools, whether you get free breakfast at schools, for example. That's something that Bridget Phillipson is introducing. It's also about quality of housing and your access to housing. So it's about wages and jobs. So there's a whole load of things you've got to look at across government to tackle child poverty, and that's what this task force will do.
So the other big story this week, obviously, is the beginning of the very long Conservative leadership contest. Rishi Sunak has said he's going to be acting leader until the 2nd of November, so we've got plenty of fun ahead. Obviously, the former Home Secretary, James Cleverly, has come out and said he's going to stand. Tom Tugendhat says he's going to stand. But there's a lot of people kind of, in the wings that we think we're going to see hear from in the next few days. What do you make of some of the candidates? Who do you think is someone that Labour needs to worry about?
Well, I mean, I thought it was pretty extraordinary that Tom Tugendhat has today announced that he would take the UK out of the European courts. I mean, that is not.
He'll think he would do it. He's caveated it, hasn't he? Maybe it's a very Rishi Sunak approach.
Well, I mean, I think if what are supposedly more moderate centrist Tories already flirting with the hardline sort of Brexiteers in the Tory party, he's making the same mistakes that David Cameron made, Rishi Sunak made, and I thought that was surprisingly foolish on his behalf. So I'm not sure that strategy is really going to work for him. If they want a hardline Brexiteer, they're not going to vote for Tom Tugendhat. So stop trying to pretend that you've had a Damascene conversion to that. Now that there's a Tory leadership campaign on, James Cleverly has got a lot of experience, but I'm surely that Kemi Badenoch must be the favourite. Surely.
She certainly is the favourite. And it's going to be quite tough to beat it, I think, because you see quite a ground. People flock to the person who they think is the favourite, don't they? Because essentially you want to be part of that gang. You want to be part of the winning team. So I think she definitely does have that advantage at the moment. But, this is a very long contest. There is a lot of potential for slip-up between now and November. And you essentially getting 4 candidates at party conference. There is a long way to go.
It's going to be chaos.
It is very long. What's the thinking behind it being so long?
I mean, I think it's crazy. But I think there was a split between the party's board, who wanted a quick contest, and the 1922 committee, who think the party should really reflect on what went wrong and work it out. I don't think they're going to come up with any kind of conclusive answer in November that they can't come up with now. So it seems mad to me. But I suppose it does give people time to, move on from the difficult campaign and have a bit of a break and a bit of a kind of step back from it all. I guess it does give you that. But essentially, you're going to have 3 former Home Secretaries. We're expecting 3 former Home Secretaries in this contest. They're all going to have to defend their record on immigration. That's going to be quite tough for them. And you will see, obviously, Tom Tugendhat, as you say, he is very much a centrist, but obviously he's having to flirt with the right of the party, because when it goes out to the membership, obviously they do tend to be a bit more to the right, and so he's very conscious of that. And so you can see a scenario where Tom Tugendhat is the most popular with MPs, but Kemi Badenoch would be more popular with the grassroots. You end up with a kind of Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak thing all over again. One is more popular with MPs, one is more popular with the party, and then, I don't necessarily see that resolves anything because you're not uniting. I think it's going to be quite difficult for them.
And is Suella Braverman, is she finished really, or?
I think she's going to struggle to get the nominations because even people who were very much in her gang are now
looking elsewhere.
Looking elsewhere, yeah. That's a polite way of putting it.
So there's a sort of story floating around that she might defect to Reform. Is that a bit of mischief, or is there something in there?
I think... So I asked Nigel Farage very directly about this. I interviewed him on Monday, and he was absolutely insistent that no talks have taken place. But we know what happens in these things, don't we? No talks have taken place until they take place.
Until it happens.
Yeah. So... I think it would be good for them because they don't have a woman. So you can see the advantage for them in having somebody with a high profile and a woman who joins their ranks. You can see why that would work for them. I think she isn't very popular in the party at the moment, so you could see why she would make that leap. So I think it works. I think it works well all round. The big problem is, obviously, she has only just been elected on a Conservative mandate. And so I think that is the big problem here. How do you go a few months in from an election where you stood as a Conservative MP to then jump in ship and signing up with another party. I think we've obviously, over many years, people have discussed that there should be some kind of mechanism for automatically triggering a by-election if you defect to another party. And for many reasons, parties obviously shy away from that because it benefits them. You know, the pendulum swings, doesn't it? Sometimes you get, obviously you had, the Labour Party had quite a sensational defection in the shape of Natalie Elphig. and so
Comrade Natalie.
She's singing the red flag. But yeah, so, I mean, you know, so actually nobody ever puts that mechanism in place. But I think voters would feel quite cheated if they had voted for the Conservatives and they ended up with a Reform candidate by default.
Yeah, interesting.
So, Sam, moment of the week?
Well, President Biden, he gave a speech last night explaining, or attempting to explain, I'm not sure we were any clear as to exactly why he finally made that decision to pull out of the race. We all suspect we know why, but he did not address his health issues at all. And although he was talking about passing on the baton to the next generation, passing on the torch, he actually did sound pretty miffed. He did say, I think I've got a mandate for a second term, the work I've done. He did not sound like a man who'd done this voluntarily. So I thought it was very interesting. Lizzy, what's yours?
I'm going to pick Ellen Morgan becoming the new leader of Welsh Labour and soon to be sort of, if confirmed, the first female First Minister of Wales, which is quite a moment. Keir Starmer hailed the appointment and said it was historic. And I thought it was quite interesting because UK Labour's never had a female leader, has it, John?
No.
When are we going to see that?
Not for some time, because Keir Starmer is going to be in place for a long time to come. But we do have some excellent women who could at some point succeed Keir Starmer in the very, very, very distant future. People like Rachel Reeves. So we do have the first female Chancellor, Rachel Reeves.
We do.
She is excellent. I should probably say that my moment of the week is appearing on the Division Bell.
Thank you very much. That's very kind. And it's been absolutely brilliant to have you on. Thanks so much for making the time, and you've been a great guest. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
And that's it for now. This has been the Division Bell. If you want to email us, you can email us at thedivisionbell@reachplc.com. Bye for now. Thank you for listening. This is a Reach Studio production hosted by myself, Sam Lister, and John Stevens. Produced and edited by Lydia O'Malley, Shabir Nurzai. Our researcher is Sheila Mahmoodi, and design and art direction by Curtis Phillips Cozier and Luke Stidson. Audio managed by Matt Millard, and social content managed by Gully Burrows and Ed Washington. Content production and design overseen by Yara Silver, Harry Dumanel, and Spencer Robotham.